garden design in tricky small spaces, which I'm so excited about. This is Tawnya Rourke. I'll hand it over to you, and yeah, just let me know if I can help.
Okay. So a quick preface, like I said, I usually just talk, and this is the first time I ever made a slides presentation. And thank goodness our kids were shut up with COVID for 2 years and learned how to do all of that, because they pretty much taught me this. I am pretty old school, so I love leaning on this as my outline, but if I totally wander, I don't apologize very much for it. So, so this is me. I actually am a professional landscaper, and let me get used to this. That is my logo. You won't see it anywhere because I'm really busy, so I don't advertise. My bio, I am a child of ranchers, sharecroppers, hunters, and market gardeners. That is a true story. And I have been gardening on my own since I was 12. And that came in all shapes and forms, and basically learning was the result. Maybe not a whole lot of food. I paid for my entire first year of college for the sale of livestock from FFA and selling bedding plants. So I started propagating and growing plants professionally when I was in high school. In 2013, I took a permaculture design course, which I highly recommend to anybody, just even to put in your satchel of tools. I don't truly believe that a 2-week course prepares you to teach permaculture. I think it prepares you to try to live it. That's my disclaimer. I do not teach it. I have been landscaping professionally here in the Flathead since 2015. And I like to joke. My son read this and he says, "Mom, you have a PhD?" No, I do not. I have a bachelor's in liberal arts. I have a PhD in what I call the School of Hard Knocks. So any expertise that I have gained from life, from a lot of screw ups, the year of tears and moldy, rotten things. And that's where I get my knowledge. So you will find all kinds of sources that might disagree with me. And in fact, I disagree with quite a few other sources. So I'm just a big disclaimer. I'm teaching from the heart. So on that line, how many of you know who Brene Brown is? Okay, she's one of my gurus. Just got to spend a lovely weekend at Quinn's Hot Springs. So first things first, water, space, sun, not really. Go back up the truck a little bit. What's your desire? Why do you want to do this, right? So I recently read a great part of her book that said, it's a long story, but I'll make it short. I'm not here to tell you how to get there. I'm not here to show you a bunch of fancy garden designs and you get to pick one, right? I'm here to tell you and teach you to learn on your own what's in your way of your best garden design. As life would have it, I got a thing in my feed the other day, the perfect garden design. I mean, let's not use the P word, okay? In my opinion, gardening should be therapeutic, joyful, and a spiritual experience. And just don't let it become a job that you dread, right? And, you know, a lot of people, it's kind of the new thing. I got to grow a garden, right? COVID made us feel like scarcity was a huge issue in our lives. And I just caution you to come back to what you love. So back to the actual first things, water, space, and sun. And these are my favorite guiding principles from permaculture. And when I say I'm permaculture trained, that's really what it is. I don't consider myself a permaculture expert. I bring it to the table all the time in my life, in my cooking, my cleaning, my gardening, how I run my business. And so the basic principles that I always keep in the back of my mind, and my favorite is what I learned as PATO, prolonged and thoughtful observation. And that basically means paying attention to stuff. Where's your sun falling? You know, when you have your iced tea in the evening, like, oh, wow, look how warm this wall is right now. Note to self, right? Stacking functions, that kind of explains itself, but, you know, it's basically making anything you do serve more than one purpose. And I'm not going to get into this because there's a deep dive on pretty much every slide that I could do that could take the whole hour. All right. I'm just going to introduce this to you and then encourage you to go looking for more. Earth care, people care, fair share. If you go to Google permaculture, that is likely going to be the first thing you come up with. And again, it kind of speaks for itself, but I try to be really mindful of what I'm doing with and for the earth, and to always ask the earth, hey, what do you want to do with this right now? What's your goal for this? This is less about me and more about you. People care, you know, I pay attention to my clients, my kids, myself. I like to pay attention to people's needs and wants. And sometimes gardening is an emotional experience. I might show up to a client's house and we just talk about their life and a little bit about their garden. And fair share. I am a big sharer of food. If you come to my place and see me, you're not leaving empty-handed unless you insist. And I really love this one, the smallest change and the greatest effect. Oftentimes we try to make things way too complicated, right? Like, oh, it's this huge thing I want to take on, and that will usually stymie you. There's usually one little tweak you can make that's going to make a big change. And these are broad sweeping statements, and that's why it's on Zoom, and you can refer back to it if you feel like it. But that's something that I learned that, makes a lot of sense to me. When I'm doing a garden design, whether it's mine or for somebody else, I have an eye to reduce waste, inputs, and maintenance. I have way too much going on to spend all my time maintaining my garden. And I also know that that's usually my client's goal. What's the least maintenance thing I can do? Well, let me tell you, there's pretty much zero thing as zero maintenance. It just doesn't exist. You're doing this because you love it. So plan to spend some time in it, right? But also make the plan that you don't have to spend more time than you need. And I love maximizing yields, and there are a lot of tricks to that, and we'll get into some, and I can take some questions about it too. But if you maximize your yields, you're going to maximize your joy for your garden and your fair share and on, right? And pay attention. Like, this is how I feel like I've become an expert. And I didn't want to bring all of my things, but one of my favorite things is my journals, and they're not just about my feelings. Every single morning, I write down yesterday's temperature, today's temperature, the weather, what's blooming, what I might have harvested, what might have just gone bad in my root cellar, heavy quotes. And I learn from that, and I refer back to it. I love the 3-year planners because I can flip through and go, did we have this much snow 2 years ago? Wild. And keep it diverse. And I stack that together, not because they're related, but because I ran out of space. So keep it diverse. It's good for the health of your garden, and it's good for beauty. It's good for the pollinators. And that means all kinds of things we'll get into more. And I always keep an eye to pollinators and predators. And I'll talk more about them too. So first consideration, water. I designed and installed this garden with a very specific desire from the client. Really tried to talk this client into water. We've got to consider how you're going to water this. You're not going to water this mama by hand, right? And there's a whole other section. Let me experiment with this little darling. On the other side of this car is a whole other section like this, right? He didn't do irrigation. Last summer, he went and did irrigation, and they had to pull up my path and trench it. Didn't make my heart very happy. So think about that first, all right? Facts in my experience about water and gardens, pots and containers, and probably a lot of you, if you're here, you know this, they need more water. They just do. And that includes raised beds. Drip irrigation is great. And I brought some if we have time to do a short talk about that at the end, but it needs to be monitored. You can't just set up drip and then walk away. It's too much. It's not enough. And it gets busted all the time. So you have to keep track on that too. Hand watering is my favorite. It keeps you engaged in your garden. I like to be engaged in my garden. I like to see when bugs are popping up and when blossoms are falling and where the bees are really truly hanging out and what my kids are damaging or eating or not eating. And no two pots or plants are created equal. Learning how to not overwater or underwater is really a gift. You learn to lift a pot and feel it and look at leaves. And I always say, let the plant tell you the story. Let the plant teach you. And you'll learn in time what not to put in the same pot as each other. They have different needs, this kind of thing, right? And then this picture itself is not mine. I found it because I didn't have a picture of mine. It's how I give water to my pollinators. They need a place to land, and I have all kinds of birds that come to this. I read a lot about this. People do swimming pools, but always put something in there for them to land on. And something this small, you have to fill it all the time. But if you're hand watering, you just give it a squirt. And I see bees come to this a lot. Be really cautious of having open water sources where bees can't land on something because they will drown. And space, this is where we get into like, make this your own, right? You guys, every single one of you has a different space you're here for that you have in mind. I can't possibly know that. It's your own. And this is where your prolonged and thoughtful observation kicks in. Like only you know your space. And I love this picture. I got this off of online too, because I don't have a great picture of my space, but it's your own, and you're going to have warmth, and you're going to have cool, and you're going to have moss and all different things that you want to do with it. And keep your goals in mind and your materials on hand. I love just using the stuff I have, and I save pots. I mean, I am the homestead hoarder, right? So my shed is full of pavers and pots and fencing pieces and all kinds of things. And I like to keep in mind whenever I am teaching someone about gardening to take baby steps. You might say like, oh, this year I want a can, I want to go nuts. That means a lot of growing of food, and that can be overwhelming. So I encourage just edge into it gently, and it keeps it achievable and fun. And then you start getting into a little bit of technical knowledge, which the journaling comes in handy here. But knowing your plant's terminal size is pretty important when you're planting a garden, right? So if you're going to plant, a great example for me is I'm still learning about asparagus. Love asparagus. Last year was my first harvest, and I've been dinking around with it for years, and it's huge. And I didn't realize how huge it was going to get after every year. It gets bigger and bigger, right? And so what I did was plant it. I'm experimenting with containers in my bed. I planted it in the front containers, and now I can't see my flower patch behind it. Well, that's getting moved this spring because I want to see my flowers from my house. So I didn't keep that in mind when I planted it. And if you've got like winter squash takes up a ton of space, I mean, things like that, not discouraging you from growing it, just keep it in mind. And they will like smother other plants, cover up their sun. There's a lot to learn there. And I really encourage people to experiment with all different kinds of varieties because there's just a litany out there. And to grow what you'll actually eat. Like, you know, hey, kale is super healthy, but how many of your husbands and children are like, ew, don't even feed us that stuff, or eggplant? Those are the two plants I've stopped growing on my property because literally no one will touch them. If I tell them they're in the food, I just buy it and stick it in a smoothie. But so anyway, I like to be really practical about that. Like in our family, we eat onions, carrots, garlic, potatoes. I grow a lot of those things, not so much of the greens because I'm the only one who eats them. And I didn't show any drawings because you can get bogged down in that, but I personally love to draw it, and I love to use graph paper and get some measurements and look at it, whether I'm redesigning a kitchen or my garden. When you draw it, you can conceptualize, and this time of year is great for that. Just get some sketching going, and it doesn't have to be professional, and it doesn't have to be digital. I like pencils and papers. Sunshine. Here's another garden I designed. This is a very small section of it. This is a full southern exposure, and there are certain plants that will just not love this. And that is something you learn with time. Daisies are one. They look like you're not watering enough. That's because they wilt in the afternoon sun. And so then you might want to tuck them behind a little something else. I'll show you a little bit later where my daisies are in part of my garden. And I think it's important to consider the difference between warmth and sun, right? So direct sun can fry some things. Like good example is peppers. Peppers love warmth. Sun, not as much. They can sunburn pretty easily. It can stunt them. So I generally will plant them like in my hoop house that, you know, goes this way, south, north. I'll plant the peppers behind something else. So they still get lots of warmth and some filtered sun, but not direct scorching sun. Again, just something you learn with time. I mean, if I tried to go through all of that, you guys would be like, get out of here. This is boring me to death. So, and black pots and ground plastic and mulch in that case gather heat and can be good or bad, right? So you can scorch the heck out of something that way, like a small black pot. You put something sort of delicate in there, you could burn it that way. But this year did it. I've seen other people do it. So this year I wanted to try it. I put all my winter squash in a big sheet of, I think it's 10 mil. I don't know. It's black plastic we got from Lowe's. It's a little stinky. I have some environmental, glitches with it, but I really wanted to try it. So I just cut little holes in it, and I put my squash plants in it because I planted late. I needed to give them a jump start, and it totally cut down weeds, like not cut down, eliminated weeding, done. Watering, I punched holes throughout it so the water could kind of go through. And I've learned over time that squash foliarly collect their water as much as on the roots. Another experiential issue there, but it gathered warmth, and I got ripe squash when I had no right to. So that is definitely something I would recommend using cautiously, but it's a cool trick in our climate. I start all my squash inside to give them a head start, and then putting them in black plastic was awesome. It worked great. All that said, I wouldn't plant lettuce that way. So, and again, more of my pacho trick, just spend some time in your space, right? Like if you put a lawn chair out in this garden, you're going to realize the shade like never hits it. And most plants don't need or want actual full sun, like in terms of all day long. Onions love it. Carrots love it. Like you choose onions based on long day, because we have long days here in the summer, but not all of them do. And, a lot of things will bolt if they get too much sun. And I don't know if you guys know what that means, but it means go to seed sooner than you might want. Most of the greens, cilantro especially, lots of lettuces. So they like to be in a cooler shade, but you could also shade them with those huge plants like asparagus, right? So that's also considered companion planting, and maybe another story. This is a picture of my hoop house that gets ahead of me because I work for other people. I tried to be a little funny here. My son said to be exciting, and I was like, well, maybe I can do funny. What is going to get in your way, right? Because I can help you learn that. And it might or might not get in your way. And if you know Brene Brown, you get this joke that it's probably not going to be vulnerability and shame. All it could. Watering issues are a real potential issue, and it's either too much, not enough. Hot water. So sometimes your hose can have a lot of hot water sitting in it. You can burn plants that way. But little trick I learned from Bill Clanton. I don't know if anybody in this room knows him, but he was one of the first gardeners I learned from in this valley. He's no longer here. Is warm water can actually warm your roots of your tomatoes and things and give them a little boost. So like if you've got your starts in the house and you water them with slightly warm tap water, just another little step ahead, right? Harsh water. I brought this as an example. A lot of folks are like, hey, it's what I got. It's what I'm watering with. Do not use the hard stream. Okay. I will do my best to use really good language here, because if anybody in this room knows me, they know that's not my strong point, but it is not nice to your plants. It messes with their root zones. It damages their leaves. They like gentle water. Shower. Shower is my favorite. I especially love the long wands that only have shower. And then when your kids are watering for you, they cannot screw it up, right? So space issues, lack of airflow. This garden is going to have some issues with mildew if it stays like this, because the air can't move in there. And my tomatoes need to be pruned and they need to be trellised. And I don't know if you guys can tell the difference between what's what in there, but so there's my thermometer. I like to keep track of that. I've gone digital since. It's more fun. Trellis tomatoes that are going crazy. And I let my flowers go nuts wild in my hoop house because it brings pollinators in. They just reseed naturally, cosmos and calendula down here. This is squash, and I like to plant squash in here sometimes when I want an easier year because it takes up a ton of space, and it's a great way to get like a butternut to ripen that doesn't normally ripen in our climate. But the vines just go crazy, climbing all up in the tomatoes and stuff, so you can prune them. Find your blooms and your squash and then prune the plant back and just keep it in place. And you can prune tomatoes too. And this, again, another class, but Google it, look it up, you can do it. Don't be afraid. I have garden clients that are like, I'm going to hurt it. No, I mean, unless you chop it off at the ground, you're not going to hurt it, right? And so too much airflow is what we call wind. And that's one of the biggest reasons we use hoop houses and high tunnels and other forms of shelters. And it's gotten windier because I keep track of these things. Wind is a bad thing for tall plants like sunflowers, corn, tomatoes. It's a major bummer. And, you know, when we had some bad hail and wind last summer, you can actually see the big fields of oats and stuff will just lay down, and farmers they're crying at night, I'm sure. And it's one of the reasons I keep my delicate stuff. Either I have a windrow of Carolina on the north side where it used to be, those were the harshest winds. That's not so much the case anymore, but keep my corn on the safe side of that. So it gets southern sun and wind protection. And then not enough space for larger plants, or wasted space by planting little plants. And then you're just taking up space that you could use more wisely. The containers can be too small for the root. And the wrong material of container. And I don't care for terracotta. That's my thing. It has its purpose. It's not my love. I actually like plastic. I'm a big fan of plastic. My window boxes are plastic. My containers I grow on my patio are plastic. It gets brittle. It doesn't last forever. It's not good for the environment. I know, I'm sorry. However, my plants seem to like it better. I just started experimenting with raised beds on my own property because it's what my clients all want. And I'll just briefly talk about that for just a second, because I'm going to probably run out of time fast. But my experience with raised beds is overhead watering doesn't work that great. I would deliver water to them via drip. They just don't gather it the same way. It's tougher to amend the soil in them for me. Working on that. I'm trying, just learning and talking to them about, like, what do you need? More poop, more leaves, nothing. I still use soil testing in them. And people will slap beds together with cheap stuff, which is great, but keep an eye to the long term and where the soil is going to spread them, right? So I had this big garden last summer, and the call was to redo it for a wedding, and they wanted everything beautiful. I'm like, oh, cool. Well, I can just stick some screws in those boards. We're good. Well, I went to do that, and I realized that these beautiful 2x12s were only screwed in from the outside, and the soil was popping them hard, and it wasn't screwing them together. My husband and I dug them out, and we put brackets on the inside of the bed so that in the future, the pressure of that soil and the plants and the water is going to push out against that, right? So these are just little simple things that you can say, okay, I remember that little thing. You can buy beds, they're all different kinds and heights. My preference is for having a bed in contact with the soil, because I love the microbiome to do its job, right? And it's easier as you get older to have them higher because you're not on your knees all the time. So I have a later slide of beds that were built up from the ground, and that's a lot of material, but they're the happiest beds I work in. And to be honest, I didn't feel those beds when you see them, so I can't speak to that part. Sun issues, again, that's something to consider. Too much, not enough. And then soil, which is literally a full class. I'm just going to admit my guilt on some of these things. For my pots, I used purchased potting soil, and I really like Twofold is a brand that I like. I should have put that on my resource list. I didn't. I use it for starting inside because I've never had any problems with fungus gnats and things in my starts. We can talk more about that if you want later. And other stuff that I joke might want to make you throw in the towel. I had a client once who every year I said, take some tomato starts. You love my tomatoes, just grow them yourself. No, they make me cry every year. Like, okay, but they don't have to. Gnarly weather, like I was going to say inclement, but why use a fancy word when what we call it when it happens to us is it's gnarly and it sucks and we don't like it. Snow. It used to happen more than it does in an untimely fashion now, but still an issue. Hail is becoming a big issue. And that is one of those let go and let God moments, right? What are you going to do with hail? I spent 2 or 3 nights last summer going, oh my gosh, and getting all of my potted flowers underneath tables. You really want to do that? I mean, you're going to just have to, surrender. Heavy rain can be tricky. Nothing you can do about it. Heavy winds, frost. There are some things you can do about frost. And I did learn something else in my garden this year, that my garden is on a very gradual slant. And my house is here, my garden starts back here, and I put raised beds in here. Well, what this did was stop the cold airflow from moving to the lowest part of my property and froze my squash patch before anything else. I think I stumbled across reading about it and was like, oh, that's what happened. So what am I going to do now? Well, I can't put my squash in that bed anymore. So it's something else to learn about. Weather patterns, heat sinks, cold sinks. It's a long topic, but your observation and your notes, and that's something I never have to write that down. I lived it. I watched that squash patch freeze before anything else and went, what? Oh, I did that. Okay, noted. Thank you. And bugs, a lot of my clients freak out when they see a bug, or a lot of bugs. Sometimes you see a lot of bugs. Often you'll see a lot of bugs because you haven't been paying attention, right? So aphids are the bane of most gardeners' existence, and they do feed other bugs, and there's usually a pro and a con to most bugs. A lot of bugs in your garden are just there doing their job. It's part of the fair share piece in my world, right? So I kind of try to grow enough stuff that I'm like, well, you get some, I get some, I'm not stressed about it. Lord knows I've got 3 kids and stuff. I've got plenty to stress about. So I don't get a big headache about bugs, and I'm not a big fan of treating them with things because I'm an organic gardener. There are organic methods. I haven't had a lot of luck with them. I don't love them. I'm usually a mechanical bug management person. If I get a big aphid issue, I just pull that plant out. You're done. My plum trees are getting them every year. Well, they get a summer pruning now. So, because it's their new growth, aphids like new growth. And a lot of times, your good bugs want to eat those. And if your good bugs don't have something to eat, they may not come around. Disease, mildew, blights. I mean, if you're really worried about something, Google it, go to an extension. I can't get into that. This is a tomato picture from online. I suspect that's frost damage. Not 100% sure because there was no title with the picture. Yields and ripening. can really bum you out. I mean, I know a lot of people who grow zucchinis and don't get zucchinis, right? Like everybody's got all the zucchinis and I don't. There are a lot of things that have to do with that. Generally, in my experience, it has to do with your soil health. You don't have enough of the right nutrient. Your balance isn't great. It's too hard. It's not, like you're trying to go carrots and clay, or you don't have pollinators coming around. And that speaks to the diversity piece of wanting to have them. And then predators. This is a hair puller, right? Especially deer. And I just will tell anybody, just put up a fence. I mean, do not even mess with all the millions of dollars of deer repellent because they're going to figure it out and the fawns will still eat your food. Rabbits. I mean, I don't know who's going to hear this, is bothered by this, but I shoot rabbits. I do not let them in near my garden. And I have cats, so they eat the mice, and my dogs chase the mice, and I don't want that. And my children have a thing. My son caught him one day with one of my bamboo stakes from something, being a machete on the tops of all of my flowers. He was having great fun with his machete, and my flowers weren't super loving that. So kids can be one of your biggest pests, but teach them that they love the garden, right? Dig a carrot, eat it. Like, it's not. I just encourage them to see the beauty in it, and rather than busting them over that kind of stuff. And this is my moment. This might be the right time for the serenity prayer. God got me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And honestly, no matter how you feel about God, who God is to you, that's a great thing in gardening, because so much of it is totally out of your control. And the things that are, you can pull up your bootstraps and take care of it, right? So a few other thoughts. Know your zone. Most of us are around 4. Some of you might have a little microclimate where you're 5 or even 3. That's important when you're choosing plants from the nursery, mostly. I notice a lot of our nurseries are selling tons of zone 5 stuff as perennials, and that is like wrong, because it's going to die, most likely. And this last winter, we had -35 was the coldest day without wind chill on my property. Those zone 5 plants are toast. And know the variety of your plant and how many days to mature. The fewer, the better. That's mostly a seed packet question, but also some of your veggie labels will talk about that. And know your plant's needs, and that's nutrients, water, companions, and timing. One of the tricks with pollinators is to plant flowers that are going to bloom throughout the season, right? So you always have pollinators coming in. You need pollinators for a lot of reasons. I love them because they're my buddies, but the truth is we need them. And lots of your food is not going to produce without them. And companion planting is something you can learn with time. A lot of folks like to use fragrant herbs next to things that have problems with bugs. And as far as nutrient needs, there are things to keep in mind, like corn is a heavy feeder, right? It's going to need a lot of nitrogen. And there's the 3 sisters, that concept you guys might know about, corn, beans, and squash. Some plants will fix nitrogen, like beans. Any legume is going to fix nitrogen in your soil. So planting that near corn, it can be a good companion. One thing I have found is our season's a little short for those relationships to come to fruition, but it's still a beautiful idea, and I love the concept. Take notes. I'm just a huge fan. Not everybody wants to journal, but write it down, because you think you're going to remember, and you're probably not going to remember that variety didn't produce worth a darn, and you need to get rid of those seeds. That's a true thing too. I've started doing is I pluck the labels of things that aren't doing what I want, and I put them like on my kitchen table. So I just don't lose track of that. Perennial versus annual. I should have asked, where everybody's experience level was before I started, but I'll just briefly say that, a perennial plant's going to theoretically come back every year, and an annual is not. There are quite a few annuals that will self-seed, like my cosmos and my calendula. They might as well be perennials because they're in my garden every year, pretty much whether I want them or not. And it's only a weed if you don't want it, right? So if I've got calendula coming up in my beet patch, that's for sure a weed, because the babies look the same, and it's going to shade my beets so they need to have sun to get nice and big. Then I will sometimes dig them up and move them, or put them in pots and give them away. So be mindful of water damage in small places. I wanted to mention that this is my husband's big issue. If we put this new patio down, you can't put any pots on the patio. I'm like, oh, we're going to have a problem. So I have to figure out ways for my watering not to damage his beautiful carpentry, right? And that's a big issue. You've got, especially if you're not getting a lot of airflow, you're going to end up with moss. mildew can grow up the side of your house. So if you've got your confined spaces right next to your building, you could end up with mold all over your house. So these are things to keep in mind. And there are ways around it. You can use those plastic trays, but if you overwater them, they're still going to cause water damage. So, and then I talk about learning about harvesting, storing, and eating or using your yields. You might not be eating everything you're growing, but using them, whether you're cutting the flowers, saving the seeds, you know, and investigate that, learn about it. And then maybe some things don't make the cut the next year, right? Like my example is I love to grow winter squash. They cover a lot of ground, they make a lot of food, and my family doesn't eat them. And they get moldy and they make me have a heartbreak, you know, this time of year. And I'm like, all right, I think I might have to cover crop my squash bed next year because I'm just too busy. I have high schoolers and a business, and everybody's situation is going to be different in that way. And I just encourage you to pay attention to it so you don't have the heartbreak of wasting anything. Julie Lang, is that right? She's a great resource for cooking your stuff. Awesome. Fermenting, all of it. I just encourage to learn how to cook new things because that's how you're going to use your stuff. And I'm a huge fan of gratitude. My spiritual practice is gratitude. And I'm one of those people who are like, I walk by my echinacea and I see a bee on it and I'm like, oh my gosh, thank you for showing up. That's so awesome. That kind of stuff just lights my day up, right? I thank my flowers for opening. I make everybody come and go, kids, the tulips are blooming. Can you see this? Like, this is a big deal because, you know, tulips don't always open. You don't always get your flowers. And if you give gratitude to them, my belief is they're going to keep giving back to you. So gardening is a spiritual practice in my world. So some tricks I like. I love this, this foliar. I learned, thank you, Kieran, my editor. It's not pH, it's just a P. Espalier trees is a great way. Plus it's super beautiful, right? To collect heat in a space, you have limited space and limited heat and warmth. You have to train them. I totally encourage you to Google it. I've never done it. I don't need to, gratefully. Hanging baskets. There are some varieties of plants that produce crazy in a hanging basket. I'm really loving my new patio tomato friends. I mean, and they're just right there at my door. I grab a handful of cherry tomatoes in my salad, and then I can harvest the other ones in my hoop house later when I have time. And you know, they're more than often a hybrid. I try to stick to open pollinated stuff, but there's a use for everything in balance. Window baskets. I really tried. I'm sorry, I'm so dry mouth. I really tried to find a picture of this. I haven't had to do it, but I gardened on the coast. I lived on the coast for 18 years. Slugs. Oh my word. Like forget strawberries, lettuce, chard, just forget about it. And I was at somebody's house one time and they had the big PVC, it's like this big, and they cut it right down the middle, and then they put it in a window box and they planted all of their lettuce and strawberries up high where the slugs couldn't get them. So it's a great use of space. It's a great way to get your plants away from slugs, and slugs are becoming more and more of a problem here. Over the 9 years I've been here, I mean, initially 0 slugs and snails. And I can honestly say that every year more and more and more and more. A note on that, this last year I experimented with not tilling in or broad forking in, depending on the space, my leaves and my hoop house. Worst year ever for slugs and earwigs in my tomatoes. No weeds, earwigs and slugs. So learning, I'm going to do things differently. I'm going to do some trapping with cardboard. It's wet, and, you know, just try to get them out of there manually as much as I can. I also took the plastic off my hoop house to freeze the ground really hard. I'll let my chickens in more. I mean, if I have to carry them in there and cage them in, I will. And then I love the idea, and I say this a lot, observe, right? But what I do is I love to just look at other people's gardens. Love it. It's my favorite thing. I go on a walk and I don't even realize where I am. I'm like, oh, that's how they prune their fruit tree. Or look what's growing in that container. That's a perennial. And I know that's overwintering in a container, which, by the way, does not often happen. That was probably something I should have mentioned earlier, but a perennial in a container, often the roots are going to freeze and you're going to lose it. That's almost always the case. Peonies are an exception to that if they're in like a wine barrel, and you still have to really baby them through the first couple of winters. I like to put bags of soil around it and some like a gunny sack over the top. This is a picture of a columbine. My columbines reseed, they attract pollinators, they love to grow here. And I'm not going to fight with things like roses that need all kinds of antifungals and on and on and on. They're gorgeous. I love roses. They're a pain in my rear. And these are not. They do have a little worm that wants to eat them, but you know what's a trip? They leave the flowers. So, okay, you get the leaves, I get the flowers. I'm cool with this. That doesn't do you any good, does it? This is a picture of a subterranean greenhouse that my cousin had built for her in Utah. And you can kind of see the earth berm, right? So they dug out all of this earth and they piled it on the back and then they built this structure over it. So you can see the steps going down. She fully had harvestable yields all year round. I would love to do that. I live right by the river and my water table is really high. So it's probably not going to happen for me, but I mean, and I've seen one in Idaho. I love this concept. I love the idea of eating my own greens and stuff. She had tomatoes in there. I was there in March in 2021 and there were ripe tomatoes in there, ripe cucumbers. Not kidding. Very cool. Okay, so this is also not my picture. Love this. What a cool trellis. It might be a real bugger to get peas off of there once they die, but I think it looks super cool. And what I'm getting at here is to see what you have. You don't have to go to a garden store and throw down hundreds of dollars. You or your neighbors or yard sale somewhere has things that are going to make your gardening in a small space. Like that's a canoe, right? Cool. How cool is that? I love that picture. And you know, the window box is just a window box. But I was going after that PVC thing. Anyway, you can get creative, right? And if you can't get creative, Google will help you. So a little gratuitous bragging. This is my, let's see, which garden is that? That is the middle of my food garden. Look at all those flowers. That's the middle of my food garden. You've got borage. Let's see, I can't see it up there as well. Borage, yarrow, calendula, Monarda. Oh my, the hummingbirds love the Monarda. Super love firecracker Monarda. Gets really tall. It spreads really well. The native Monarda does pretty well. Connie knows how it takes a little while for it to get established. I think you can see my asparagus getting crazy in the middle there. So what I've done in my garden, and I'll show you a picture of it in a minute, but I put flower beds in between everything. Not just because they're pretty, but because they serve a lot of purpose in my garden. And the slide next to it is a peony in a wine barrel. And I plant super petunias next to it because the client just loves lots of color. That's a Bartzella peony, which is yellow. It's fairly rare. And that is one of them that I lined the sides with potting soil and it overwintered great like that. Really good. This is my front bed. There are my daisies. And they hide with my Monarda, and I have Lychnis Maltese Cross in there, which is red, and the pollinators love that too. Lots of yarrow. You can kind of see in the top, that is monkshood, and it blooms after the first snow. Like, I love having that. I always have pictures of snow on my flowers. It blooms, you know, throughout the year. This is one of my clients here, Rocky Mountain Tile. I take care of their yard. If you guys have ever driven by there, you've probably been like, whoa, that's a big job. Also really stunning garden. And I've had so much fun over the years adding to it and propagating and the pollinators that come to that place. You're not going to find many businesses that attract pollinators. So that's another view of my front garden with the daisies and stuff. It needs a little thinning, as you can probably see. These are some pots I started for a client. Just a little picture, just a couple of things I do. There's like 1 day's yield of my garden. That's like a pretty big dinner. There's my garden. This was probably August. So these are the beds that I planted that ended up blocking the flow. You can't tell, the grade is so minor, but there's a little dip right here where my squash was. I do like rows, and that's mostly because I married a carpenter. If he and I weren't a unit, I would probably be a lot more cottagey, right? So this is a new bed. Every year, I'm kind of addicted to this. I expand my garden. It started out with 1 apple tree, 2 apple trees, lawn, 9 years ago. I have added, the initial bed was probably this one right here, and I tilled it and planted right into it, and the grass took over everything. Don't recommend that method. The best method I had was Probably the most labor intensive. I hired somebody with a double mold bore plow to come and turn all of it. And then I shook out every single piece, left the soil there, piled the grass, and I had this gorgeous soil that I could just freely amend. No quack grass, no nothing. Oh my gosh, labor intensive. This one, I took a sod cutter, cut the sod off. We just did this last summer. And in this section right here, we double cut the sod. And in this section, we cut the sod and then tilled. This section did a lot better, but the quack grass came back because we tilled those little quack grass roots, grass roots, and they propagated. So this little guy hated this. It never got any water because I water with a sprinkler. I put net-butter in there, petunias, nothing grew. So we are learning. And there's my chicken coop. There's my carragana hedge that shields it from the wind. This is southern exposure coming in. And then my fruit trees shade out my green bed. So I pretty much don't rotate that very much. This bed and this bed, I do greens in and things that don't want a lot of sun. Obviously not a small and tricky space. I'm pretty blessed to have a lot of great soil and space. And this is pond liner. And I, as a landscaper, I have a wholesale license and I can get knockoff pond liner. And it collects water. It's not perfect in that way, but it stops quack grass from invading my beds because it makes the grass unhappy. It does not kill it. You lift that and that quack grass is still growing under there. It's just not happy. But it is the answer to not having quack grass in your beds. So you might have a little, you dig it out. You leave a grass path around your garden, it's getting into your garden for sure. And I mean, I don't mind dandelions. I don't mind lots of other weeds. Quack grass, I mind a lot.
What is the name of that?
Sorry?
What was that liner called?
Pond liner.
Pond?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, literally they use it to build ponds. And so it's plastic that's about that big. It's super heavy. It does break down a little over time. I used to lift it in the winter, and then it was just one of the things that fell off my list, right? It's just too much to do. I will say that ants like to hang out under there. So that's not awesome. And voles, maybe a little, but my cats are all over the voles. So I'm pretty lucky in that way. Let's see, I think I have a couple more. Okay, those are the tall raised beds. And I didn't design this garden, but this year she said, I just want pollinators. And so I went nuts. I love that. Please just attract pollinators. This is my favorite job. And they're so beautiful. And honestly, when I had to pull it, it broke my heart because they were still blooming after the frost. It was a really good gig, but she has a lot of problems with her knees and that height of bed, it's right here. And what I like about that design is the contact with the substrate of the soil. And there are other beds that are like raised and they just have air underneath them. So two problems with that: no soil contact and the airflow. It's going to be colder quicker underneath, right? If you ever sit in a lawn chair in the cold when you're camping, your butt gets colder first. This is another garden I designed, and my biggest issue with this is deer. And whitefish, the deer will eat everything. Every single thing I thought that would be okay, they have either pulled it out or eaten it anyway. And so now this beautiful garden bed has to be fenced in. And the client doesn't love the fence, but what are you going to do? So this is a crack up. Every year I just get such a kick out of my carrots. They dance, they get really vulgar, they do all kinds of fun things. And so year before last, I planted my entire garden in one day with the help of two awesome young ladies because I started my carrots by seed and transplanted them. Don't super recommend that because that is hard to eat. And actually there's way more that are much more contorted. Still eat great. If that's what you got to do it. Oh, carrot note. I saw a friend of mine on Facebook plants her carrots in big pots and then she brings them in. So instead of pulling them, she brings them in to her fairly insulated garage and then plucks them to eat. I'm going to try it. This is one of my harvests. Tons of tomatoes, herbs. I always harvest my yarrow. I use it medicinally. Tomatillos, elderberries. I grow elderberries, like the best medicine on the planet. I'm a huge fan of growing medicinals. You guys want to know more about that? Ask me. A couple more harvest pictures on my spuds, my winter squash, beans. I just grow a lot of food. So, and that's at my house. And you know, the end, or is it the beginning? You know, wax poetic. That's my front yard. my view. And I have a big garden right there and a lovely buck rake that I nailed from my neighbor that just makes me happy. And I grow pumpkins all over it. And yeah. So anyway, this is what I love to do. I don't know if I have any time. I have no time.
Yeah, we've got 10 minutes for questions.
Oh, cool. Yay. So do you guys want to ask questions or do you want a little drip teaching moment? Which would you prefer? Drip teaching? Okay. All right. I am a wholesale. I can get wholesale and a retailer, so I can set you up with a full kit. That is definitely something I would love to do for people. Kind of hard to get some of this stuff. I get it from 2M because I have a license to. Murdoch's is a decent resource. So this is called Dripper line. It has little emitters in it. This is my favorite thing. I love to put this, I zigzag it through beds, or I put it like when I plant a big perennial. A lot of landscapers will just, I don't even have them because I don't like them. A drip emitter, and they'll put one on one side. And in about 5 to 10 years, that plant will die halfway because it's just not getting enough water, right? The root zone can't get it on the other side. I put a loop around trees, sometimes 2 loops. So this is called spaghetti hose. So this doesn't have any holes, and this is how you get from point A to point B. And there are all elbow connectors and stuff that put these guys together. These are plugs to put at the end. Sorry, Dripper. Duraflow dripper line. So these are the plugs for that. This is a 1/2 inch. This is how you get your main delivery of water to where you're headed. And these, I looked for a long time for something like this, and they would tell me there is no such thing. That is not true. This takes your normal hose bib, and attaches it to that. Okay. Oh my gosh. I seriously, if I had $1 for every, forgive my sexism, guy who told me that there's no such thing, you just have to keep looking and find it. And the guys at 2M are getting used to me. So I think they're going to start carrying more of my stuff. So there are 2 different kinds. I really prefer this. I don't like these. I just pull this off. My summer hands are stronger. Pull this off, and then I use what's called an odoker. So it's a, you put this over this goes in here, and then you use these guys. It is winter for sure. And then you clamp this little tab here, and you squeeze it down really hard, and then it won't pop off when the pressure pushes against it. So this is to your hose spigot. Okay.
Oh, that's to the faucet.
Yeah, faucet, spigot, hose, whatever you got. I recommend putting a valve on it first, because then you can adjust your pressure, because some of us are going to have way too much pressure and we're going to blow out our drip line with the pressure. So I always use these guys. I have them all over my property on everything. I water an acre with hoses. There's a lot of work involved with that, but I use these on everything because then I can change a sprinkler. I can take it off of my drip and put it on a hose. Love these. And they're like, if you get them in the spring when they have them, they're like $1 a piece at Ace or whatever, right? This is one of the ways, there's more than one way to stop the end of your 1/2 inch. Okay. So
You said that was just called a pressure valve.
I just call it a valve. I mean, when you go into like the section that has all of these guys, you're going to see these, but they're almost always gone by like mid-July. So this, you put this over the end, and then you fold this back. And I like these the best because they're not forever. And then you get it back on both sides, and you shove it up like that. And then your water stops at the end of your 1/2 inch. Okay. I use like 200 feet of this, right? So I always have this with me. And this is really easy to fix with a simple splice kit. If you get your stuff from me, I would definitely include splice kits for you to do that. Part of what I do as a landscaper is teach. If I prune your trees, if I do your drip, you're going to learn from me. And not great for my job security, great for you. And then there's this option, which I don't use as much of anymore. This is a sprinkler stake. And this goes right into this like that. And then there are a bunch of different tops you can put on it. 90 degrees, 180, 360, different kinds. If you are on a well, these get clogged up pretty easily, which is cool to have these guys, right? These little filters into your, I totally recommend doing that into your drip. In fact, if you can put one on here and one on here, you're going to save the life of your drip for sure. My problem with these is the maintenance. I'm not a fan of maintenance. Like when I had Rocky Mountain and first got Rocky Mountain Tiles account, it was really just a few shrubs and stuff, and these were everywhere. And people and their dogs, well, they get cold and brittle, right? Snap them off and they break, and then you've got this spout wasting water, right? But like, if you want to put this in a raised bed and start your carrots, that's, some plants are going to prefer that gentle mist. Generally speaking, over time, this is going to be a great solution for any kind of raised bed. I do this in my hoop house now, and I just put a strand of this all across the whole top. I have 3 rows. I put a T connector on it, and I put this down, or I just connect this directly in with this fancy tool. It's got, you can't see it super great, but see how it's got a little pokey job there? And it happens to be the exact shape of 1/2 inch. So for people with hand strength issues, this is a fantastic tool. So you punch this in, and then you've got your little elbow barb that you put onto this, or straight barb. There's straight, elbow, T, and then you put this on it. So this barbs into this, and then I string this down my tomato row, and I'm done watering for the summer, right? Like, but I keep track of it. So if it gets, like, a mouse might chew it, right? Or, I mean, the kids trip over it and undo the barb. Or I trip over it and undo the barb. That has happened. I also like fabric staples to stick, make things stay down so you don't trip over them as much. So in short, I'm not a big fan of these anymore, but they have their purpose. Sometimes you can find some of this stuff at a yard sale. It's not very graceful to do it, but you can blow through it to make sure that it's not clogged up with stuff. Believe me, when I'm working, I do all kinds of things, kill bowls with my tools. And then I'm like, oh, that might be gross, actually. So, yeah, summer me, winter me, we're different. So,
Alex worked on like 4-week timers.
yes. So, a little bit about timers. I have had a little issue with them failing and causing leaking issues, like in your basement and stuff. So leaving your water turned on against something like that, I'm not 100% in love with that idea. You're going camping for 4 days and you don't want your garden to die, totally use it for that. Also, I feel like when people get on automatic watering programs, they just lose track. They're like, it's good, I'm walking away. And then you have weeds and you have rodents and you have bugs and you have lost the joy of your garden. So there's a time and a place for automatic watering. I'm not a fan of doing it all the time. It looks like I've got a little bit of time for any other questions. And I talked super fast, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What is the current area of your garden you showed with all the raised beds and all that you did?
I've lost track of the actual square footage, but I think it's about 60 by 100, something like that. And my
That's
group,
small.
Yeah.
But this is small space.
yeah, well, that's what I was asked to teach. And I think that's because I'm a landscaper. And so like that original slide, I don't know how to go back to the very beginning, but that is a little tiny backyard that attracts as many pollinators as half my garden. And for me, I've been doing this long enough that, I can apply it to small spaces. But no, like I said, I'm super blessed with a not small space. All that said, I do have small spaces that I still garden in. And, little tiny microclimates, a little spot that never gets any sun, that has a steel bee growing in it and ground covers. And so, you could ask me your plant variety questions and I could probably say, well, here's what would grow there. Here's what they won't eat, or, that kind of thing.
Can you give us some ideas of your favorite companion plants for a small area?
For a small area. Okay, well, I like to go tall and small, like just my design sense likes that. I also like to do things like irises and stuff that just don't take a lot of time for me. So I love like irises and dianthus together, or a small growing. There's other varieties of Monarda that are shorter. Nepeta, I love, which is catmint. Oh my gosh, that attracts so many pollinators. And there are a million varieties, and you must read the label, because you can plant the same 4-inch plant and it will literally get this big, or it will get this big. So that's what I mean about terminal size, right? So I love companion colors. Like in Rocky Mountain tile, I have golden rod, sorry. And then I plant it with purple stuff, whatever I can come up with is purple, because yellow and purple like to complement each other. Let's see, I do fragrant herbs. Like when I do a client's garden on a raised bed, I will plant a row of rosemary and thyme and stuff down the middle of their greens. And honestly, does that help a ton? I'm not really convinced. I mean, I think it's a lovely concept. I have mint all over my garden that's right next to my house, and my chickens will go right over it to eat the other stuff. Like, it doesn't stop them, and it doesn't stop the deer. I had deer eat iris greens this year, to get to poppies. They eat everything. So there are some cool handouts on that. And for me, it's mostly about color at this point. Like I love daisies and monarda next to each other because they bloom at the same time. And then centaurea too, which is like a bachelor button. It's a perennial bachelor button. Also can be kind of invasive. So I dig it out every year to some degree, but the three of them together, they all bloom at the same time. And oh my gosh, they attract all kinds of pollinators and they're really, really lovely. And they're tall. They're just really tall. Yeah, so I know, I guess I didn't really answer your question. So anybody else?
You mentioned something that I missed, and we were talking about, I guess, making holes and putting the plants in, and you said something that's prevented weeds.
Plastic. Yeah, that's the black plastic part.
Oh, that's what it was.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I've tried all kinds of things with weeds in my garden because as you saw, my garden's pretty big. That's a lot of weeds. And my soil is really, really healthy. Also a lot of weeds. And I overhead water, which I said isn't the most efficient. And it's not. It also really encourages weeds. So mulches, I'm on the fence about. Like I said, slugs really hide in mulch. My experience with bark is it attracts carpenter ants and sow bugs, which aren't as bad. Carpenter ants, I don't know. I just don't love having ants. And ants are definitely like a companion for aphids. They take the aphids up into my trees and up my plants. So if you see ants around the base of your fruit trees, they're probably taking aphids up your tree, which also means they're a vector for disease. So tanglefoot is good for that or anything sticky that's grab the ants before they can get up. You can do that at the base of your raised beds if they're climbing up and over. But black plastic, like if you're an organic farmer, I think you have to lift it to be considered organic in the winter because you can't have a year-round cover. Don't totally quote me on that, but it's great for extending your season. Does it leach things into the soil that I don't love? Probably.
Do you have a suggested source for topsoil that you buy?
Well, I don't like using topsoil in my garden because I think it's too dense. So what I like to do is a mix of things, and I'm a huge fan of the free leaves at the city of Kalispell. So the city of Kalispell vacuums up the leaves down in town, right? And they take it to the water treatment plant. And they have all these great stacks. And sometimes it's loose leaves, depends on the time of year. They turn it, they compost it, and it's free. And you can go there. You're driving back there going, I'm not supposed to be here. This is not right. That's not true. You can be there. If you call, I think it's Parks and Rec. His name is Fred. He probably doesn't want me to give out his name. Sorry, Fred. On Fridays at 7:30, you can get a loader bucket into a trailer or your truck. Super awesome free source of plant material. Well, not plant material. You will get some garbage. I found a DS, a video game, right? Like, probably worse. But they actually let it compost to the point of being soil. So there's like a huge soil pile there, which is probably super rich in humic acid and is most likely not balanced in terms of your macronutrients. Like I said, soil is a whole other wormhole. Anybody else?
Use bark a lot for mulching. Or
Yeah.
just hopping.
They're the fine bark.
Fine bark.
I use fine bark.
Because it looks good and it lasts a while and it.
Yep, and what I like, so I use, I call them fresh fines. That's mostly because I think Black Gold is calling them that. I get them primarily now from Green Earth, which is probably a wholesale place. I think Columbia Nursery is carrying them now. I don't like the big nuggets because they turn gray, they end up not looking nice. And I still have to aesthetically garden, right? Like I'm not all hippie. I still have to, I get paid for what I do. So gardens have to look nice. Fresh fines are awesome because they break down into the soil. They provide a great place for plants to spread. I'm not a huge fan of weed mat either because plants can't really spread that way. And it chokes out your drip. And anyway, that's another thing. But I like what it does for the soil primarily, and it doesn't seem to attract as many pests that I don't like as larger nuggets. And the larger nuggets, when you want to replace them, you kind of have to get them out of there. That's not fun.
When you mentioned fresh vines, I'm not quite, is that a brand name or is
It's kind of a name. Some of them call it soil pep, they call it fresh vines, fine bark. It's little bitty pieces. Yeah.
Columbia calls it crushed?
Oh, that's rock.
No, they have like a crushed.
Crushed bark. Oh, okay.
Which is that small, fine.
So there's a digital handout and
And we will post the recording and the slides online on the Land to Hand website.